Layla sat trembling in the soft leather seat of the private jet, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, knuckles white, as the world outside darkened into night, the roar of the engines a distant hum in her ears. She had cried until there were no more tears left, her eyes dry and burning, her throat sore from the hours of quiet sobbing. She couldn't believe this was happening, couldn't believe she had been pushed to this point, couldn't believe her own family, her own mother had made her do this. The words rang over and over in her head. Layla, this is the only way. You have to save us. You have to save the company. You're our only hope. The desperation in her mother's voice had been real, but so had the cold calculation behind her eyes. The family was on the brink of bankruptcy, her father's health failing, the business drowning under a mountain of debt, and now Layla, 19 innocent, had been handed over like a bargaining chip, sold into marriage with a billionaire sheikh she had never met. Her heart pounded painfully in her chest, the unfamiliar world of Middle Eastern wealth and power looming closer by the second. Malik al-Said, the man she was being sent to, was a name whispered in international business circles, a legend wrapped in mystery, a man as feared as he was admired. Layla knew only the broadest outlines. He was ruthless, brilliant, strikingly handsome, and, until now, unmarried. She had seen pictures online, sharp dark eyes, angular jaw, a presence that radiated command even through a camera lens, but none of it had felt real, not until now. Her hands shook as she reached for the glass of water on the side table, her fingers brushing the cold crystal. She was supposed to be brave. She was supposed to do this for her family. But all she could feel was the gnawing terror in her gut, the gnawing shame of knowing she was being sold, knowing tonight she would stand before this powerful stranger as his wife, knowing she was a virgin who barely understood what it meant to be a woman, let alone a wife. As the jet began its descent, she tried to steady her breath, tried to hold herself together. She thought of her mother's words, "Just make him happy, Layla. Do whatever he asks, and we will be saved." She felt the tears prick her eyes again, but blinked them back furiously. She couldn't fall apart now. The car that met her at the airport was sleek, black, and silent, the driver polite but distant. The desert night stretched out endlessly beyond the windows, stars scattered like diamonds across the sky, and in the distance the silhouette of Malik's palace rose from the sand, glowing softly under the moonlight. Layla pressed her hands tightly together in her lap, her breath catching in her throat as they approached. Inside, the palace was all marble and gold, tall archways, soft candlelight, shadows that flickered along the walls. Servants guided her silently through the halls, their eyes lowered, their faces unreadable. Layla felt like a ghost, her feet barely touching the floor, her pulse a wild drumbeat in her ears. Finally, she was led into a private chamber, the door closing softly behind her. She stood frozen, staring at the vast bed draped in silk, the low fire burning in the hearth, the hush of the room pressing in around her. Her heart thudded so loud she thought she might faint. And then the door opened, and he was there. Malik al-Said stepped into the room, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black, his eyes dark and piercing as they settled on her. Layla's breath caught, her whole body going rigid. She opened her mouth to speak, to greet him, to plead. She wasn't even sure what, but no words came out. She gripped the edge of her dress, trembling, waiting for the moment she feared most. But Malik only glanced at her, his expression unreadable, and after a long, charged moment he turned away. "Get some rest," he said quietly, his voice low, smooth, and utterly disinterested. And then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him, leaving Layla standing there, heart pounding, eyes wide, stunned, confused, and for the first time that night, unsure of everything she had expected. Layla sat on the edge of the enormous bed, her fingers nervously twisting the delicate gold bracelet on her wrist, the silence of the chamber, wrapping around her like a heavy blanket. She could still feel the echo of his presence in the room, the way his eyes had flickered over her without lingering, the coolness in his voice when he had spoken only 3 words. "Get some rest." She had expected something very different. She had prepared herself, steeled herself, convinced herself that she would endure whatever he demanded, that she would suffer through the humiliation if it meant saving her family. Yet here she was, untouched, unclaimed, utterly bewildered by the man she had been given to, the man her mother had wept and begged her to marry, Sheikh Malik al-Said. Layla's mind drifted back to the conversation 2 weeks earlier, sitting in the dim study of their once grand home, her mother's face pale with desperation, her father too sick to speak, the bank letters stacked in neat, threatening piles on the desk. "We need you to do this, Layla. You are our only hope," her mother had pleaded, her voice trembling. "If you do this, the Sheikh will invest in the company. We can pay off the debts. We can survive." Layla had wanted to scream, wanted to say no, but what choice did she have? How could she watch her father die? How could she watch the house she grew up in fall to pieces? How could she let her family collapse under the weight of their mistakes? She was 19, naive, terrified, and she had said yes. Now here she was, in a palace that shimmered with gold and marble, every surface gleaming, every corner speaking of unimaginable wealth. The air was scented with jasmine, the walls hung with silk, servants moved silently through the halls like shadows, their eyes carefully avoiding hers. She felt like a delicate bird trapped in a cage of glass, shimmering and fragile. The Sheikh himself was nothing like she had imagined. She had pictured an older man, cold, domineering, eager to claim his prize. Instead, Malik was younger than she thought, only early 30s, strikingly handsome, his face carved with sharp, regal lines, his dark eyes holding an intensity that made her skin prickle. Yet he had shown no interest, no hunger, only that brief, dismissive glance before leaving her alone. She learned quickly that Malik was a man of routine. Each morning he left before she woke. Each evening he returned late, sometimes with advisors, sometimes alone, but always disappearing into his private wing. They shared no meals, no conversations, only brief, accidental glances across long marble hallways. Layla felt herself drifting, days blending into nights, her loneliness growing heavier by the hour. She wandered the palace gardens, tracing her fingers over ancient stone, watching the stars fall over the endless desert, wondering if she had made the worst mistake of her life. One evening, she worked up the courage to ask one of the maids, a kind-faced woman named Aisha, why the Sheikh avoided her. Aisha gave a small, sad smile and shook her head. "He is a man who keeps to himself," she said softly, "but his eyes follow you when you do not see." Layla's cheeks flushed, her heart tightening. She could not understand him. He was her husband, yet he remained a stranger, a presence she felt but could not touch. Sometimes she caught him watching her from across the garden or down the corridor, but when their eyes met, he always looked away. First, what Layla did not know was that Malik was battling his own storm. Years ago, he had been engaged to a woman from a powerful family, beautiful, clever, and perfectly suited for political alliance. But she had betrayed him, conspiring with his enemies, shattering his trust. Since then, he had sworn off love, sworn off marriage, viewing relationships only as tools. Yet when Layla had been presented a pure-hearted virgin offered by a desperate family, Malik had agreed out of strategy, expecting nothing but a temporary arrangement. But the moment he saw her, her wide, frightened eyes, the delicate tremble in her hands, something shifted in him. He kept his distance not out of cruelty, but out of fear. Fear that she would break through walls he had spent years building. The palace itself stood like a fortress on the edge of the desert, rising from the sands like a dream. its towers gleaming under the sun, its courtyards alive with fountains and flowers. Yet within its walls was a coldness, an emptiness, a man ruling over an empire, but locked within his own heart. Malik watched Layla more than she realized, noting the way she sat by the window and sketched the moonlight on paper, the way she knelt in the garden to touch the petals of rare flowers, the way she offered shy smiles to the servants, small kindnesses he had not expected. He told himself she was only a contract, only a tool, but his eyes betrayed him, lingering too long, softening when they should have stayed sharp. Layla, unaware of his turmoil, wrapped herself in blankets each night, staring up at the ornate ceiling, wondering if she had been wrong to come here, wondering why a man like Malik had agreed to this marriage if he had no intention of claiming her, wondering if there was something wrong with her, if she was not beautiful enough, not interesting enough, not worthy enough. Her heart ached with the weight of rejection, yet something deeper stirred within her. A tiny spark of defiance, a whisper in her soul that said maybe she was more than just a sacrifice, maybe she deserved more than being ignored, maybe she wanted to be seen, truly seen. For the first time in her life days passed, and Layla continued drifting through the palace like a shadow. She watched from the edge as Malik moved through his world, commanding meetings with quiet authority, speaking in measured tones with advisors and foreign diplomats, his presence undeniable, his control absolute. Yet at night when he passed her in the hall or sat silently across the room, something inside Layla twisted painfully. She wanted to speak, to ask why he had chosen her, why he had brought her here only to ignore her. But her courage withered each time under the weight of his unreadable gaze. She told herself that it did not matter, that this was all for her family, that her own art was irrelevant. But the truth crept in slowly, a dangerous truth she could no longer deny. She wanted more. She wanted to matter to him. One evening, Layla sat curled on the window seat, her fingers trailing over the delicate embroidery of her dress, moonlight spilling over her bare feet. She heard footsteps in the hall. Her heart quickened. It was Malik. She recognized his quiet, confident stride without needing to see him. She braced herself, waiting. But he did not come in. Instead, his shadow lingered just beyond the door, as if he too was hesitating, torn between wanting to enter and forcing himself to stay away. When his footsteps finally faded, she let out a breath she had not realized she was holding, burying her face in her hands. She wanted to scream. She wanted to understand Malik, paced in his study that night, his fingers tightening around a glass of dark liquor, his mind restless. Layla's presence unsettled him in ways he hated. She was supposed to be simple, a beautiful pawn, an easy arrangement, yet every time he saw her lost in thought, every time he caught the sadness flicker across her face, every time he noticed the small kindnesses she offered to people around her, his chest tightened painfully. He told himself to leave her alone, to keep the distance, but each day that passed, his self-control frayed further. What was she doing to him? Why could he not stop thinking about her? The next morning, Malik watched from the terrace as Layla walked in the garden, sunlight catching in her dark hair, her soft laughter drifting up as she spoke with Aisha, the old maid who had taken a liking to her. Malik's jaw clenched, his hands tightening on the railing. When Layla turned and caught sight of him, their eyes met. She hesitated, offering a tentative smile. His heart gave a painful jolt. He forced himself to look away, but the image of her smile burned behind his eyes. He cursed himself silently, feeling like a fool. Layla began noticing the small ways Malik watched over her. When she grew pale from skipping meals, fresh plates would appear at her door. When she fell asleep in the garden one afternoon, a soft blanket was draped over her shoulders. When she wandered into the library looking for a book, a rare volume would quietly show up on her nightstand the next morning. She started to realize that Malik was not indifferent. He was restrained, holding himself back, hiding something she could not yet name. Part of her wanted to push, to confront him, to demand why, but another part of her was terrified of what the answer might be. One stormy night, Layla wandered through the palace halls, restless and unable to sleep. Thunder rumbled beyond the windows, rain streaking the glass. She found herself outside Malik's study, the door slightly ajar. She peered in and saw him seated at his desk, head bowed, fingers tangled in his hair, the tension radiating from his body palpable. Without thinking, she pushed the door open, stepping inside. Malik's head snapped up, his eyes dark with surprise. And something deeper. Layla's breath caught. She whispered, "You look tired." Malik's mouth tightened. He rose slowly, his height towering over her. "You should not be here," he said quietly. Yet his feet did not move. Layla's fingers trembled as she reached up, brushing a lock of damp hair from his forehead. She did not know what she was doing, only that she could no longer stand the distance between them. For a long moment they stood there, the storm raging outside, the air between them thick with unspoken words. Then Malik reached up, his hand brushing her cheek, his touch achingly gentle. Layla's eyes fluttered closed, her heart racing. But when she leaned in instinctively, Malik pulled back sharply, his expression closing off. "Go to bed, Layla," he murmured. His voice hoarse, his eyes shadowed. She flinched as if struck, turning on her heel and fleeing the room, tears stinging her eyes. Malik cursed under his breath, slamming his fist on the desk, his chest burning with frustration. He wanted her more than anything, yet something inside him would not allow it, not yet. The following days were strained. Layla avoided Malik, throwing herself into small routines, reading, wandering the gardens, practicing music on the ancient piano in the West Wing. Malik watched her from afar, guilt gnawing at him. He knew he had hurt her, but he also knew that once he crossed that line, there would be no turning back. His past made him cautious. His heart was a battlefield he was not ready to surrender. Yet every time he saw Layla's downcast eyes, every time he heard her laughter fade, he wondered how much longer he could hold out. The servants began to whisper. Sensing the shift, they spoke of the Sheikh's unusual silence, his long hours alone, his eyes always drifting to his young bride. Layla herself heard fragments of their talk, felt the weight of expectation pressing down on her, but she was too proud, too afraid to confront Malik again. Instead, she waited, longing and hurting, hoping he would come to her, not out of duty, but because he wanted to, because he chose her, because she was no longer just a political convenience, but someone he could truly see. The days stretched long and heavy as Layla roamed the palace halls, with a heart weighed down by confusion and quiet sorrow, the shimmering silk walls and glittering chandeliers offering no comfort, her footsteps echoing softly, as if the building itself was reminding her of her isolation. She kept replaying, that night in the study, the way Malik's hand had brushed her cheek, the moment his guard had dropped just enough for her to glimpse the man beneath the title, and then the way he had pulled back, his voice hoarse, his eyes distant. "Go to bed, Layla." Those words haunted her, slicing deeper than she wanted to admit. She told herself to be patient, to wait, but every day she waited, her heart ached more, her mind spiraling with questions. Why was he keeping her at arm's length? Why did he care for her in small hidden ways but never let her close? Why had he agreed to this marriage at all? Malik, too, wrestled with his own demons, pacing his private quarters at night, his fists clenched, his mind on fire. Layla's innocent face haunted his thoughts, her tentative smiles, the softness in her voice when she spoke to the servants, the vulnerability in her eyes when she looked at him. He had been so sure at first, so convinced that this was nothing more than a political alliance, a contract, a tool to strengthen his position, but she had unraveled him without even trying. She made him want things he had buried years ago, made him remember the pain of betrayal, made him fear his own heart. Malik had built his empire on control, on discipline, on never letting anyone close enough to hurt him again. but Layla had slipped through his defenses, and now he was caught in a storm of his own making, wanting her, needing her, but terrified of what surrendering to that need would cost. It was during one of her restless walks that Layla stumbled upon something that would change everything. She had wandered into the lesser-used wing of the palace, following a trail of faint music, when she heard voices behind a half-open door. Her heart raced as she recognized one of the voices. It was her mother. Her breath caught painfully as she pressed herself against the cool marble, listening as her mother spoke in hushed, urgent tones to a stranger. "We need the Sheikh's access codes. You promised us this marriage would let us in. Our partners are waiting. We cannot afford delays." Layla's stomach twisted violently, her head spinning. She barely heard the man's low reply, only caught the words sabotage, takeover, political leverage. She stumbled away, her chest tight, her legs weak. She realized in that moment that everything she had believed was a lie. Her family had not just wanted to save themselves, they had used her, planted her in Malik's home, as a pawn, in a dangerous game she never even knew she was playing. Tears blurred Layla's vision as she ran through the corridors. She wanted to scream, wanted to tear down the walls. She had given up her freedom, her innocence, her dreams, to help her family. And now she realized they had sacrificed her not out of desperation, but out of cold ambition. She found herself outside Malik's study, her hand shaking as she raised it to knock. But before she could touch the door, it opened and he was there, his sharp gaze locking onto her tear-streaked face, his expression shifting instantly from cool detachment to fierce concern. "Layla, what happened?" His voice was low but urgent. She tried to speak, tried to tell him everything, but the words tangled in her throat, and before she knew it, she was collapsing into his arms, her small frame shaking as sobs racked her body. Malik stiffened at first, startled, but then his arms tightened around her, pulling her close, his hand stroking her hair as he murmured soft reassurances in a language she barely understood. For the first time she felt his walls crack, his careful control slipping as he held her, not out of duty, but out of genuine care. Later that night they sat across from each other in the dimly lit study, the tension between them palpable. Layla's eyes were red but steady as she finally found her voice. "I overheard them," she whispered. "My mother and someone else. They are trying to betray you. They are using me to get to you." Malik's jaw clenched, his eyes darkening, but he said nothing, only listening as she poured out everything she had overheard, everything she had pieced together. When she finished, he rose silently, his tall figure casting a long shadow across the room. Layla's heart pounded as she watched him, afraid he would accuse her, afraid he would hate her, but when he turned back, his gaze softened and his voice was quiet. "I know," he said simply. Layla's breath hitched. You knew," Malik nodded slowly. "I suspected. But I needed proof. You just gave it to me. And for that, you may have saved my life." The weight of his words crashed over her, and she felt herself tremble. Malik crossed the room in 2 strides, cupping her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the fresh tears on her cheeks. "You are not your family, Layla," he murmured. "You never were, and I am sorry I made you feel like you had to carry their sins." She leaned into his touch, her heart thudding painfully, her hands trembling as they reached up to grasp his wrists. "I was so afraid," she whispered, "afraid you would hate me, that you would send me away." Malik's jaw tightened, his eyes blazing. "I should have," he said softly, "but I cannot, not anymore." And then his mouth was on hers, fierce and desperate, as if trying to pour all the words he had never said into that single moment. The kiss broke something open inside both of them, a dam of longing and pain and need that had been building for weeks. Malik lifted her effortlessly, carrying her to the sofa, cradling her in his lap as he pressed kisses to her hair, her cheeks, her temple, his arms tightening as if to reassure himself that she was real. Layla clung to him, her fingers tangling in his dark hair, her heart pounding so loud she thought it might burst. She had dreamed of this moment, longed for it, feared it, and now that it was here, it felt like coming home. Malik whispered against her skin. "You have no idea what you do to me, Layla. No idea how close you came to shattering every wall I have ever built." She tilted her head back, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Then, let me in." "Malik," she whispered, "let me see you." That night the palace seemed to hold its breath, the moonlight casting silver shadows across the marble floors as Malik carried Layla gently through the quiet halls, her face buried against his shoulder, her hands clutching at his shirt. He did not speak, his jaw tight, his eyes dark with thoughts unspoken, but the way his arms cradled her, the way his steps slowed to match the uneven beat of her breath, spoke volumes. Layla felt the weight of everything pressing down on them, the betrayal of her family, the looming danger, the unspoken feelings between them now crackling like a live wire. She wanted to ask him what came next, wanted to demand answers, but for the first time she let herself trust him, let herself rest in the certainty of his arms, knowing she was safe. At least for this moment, Malik laid her carefully on the wide sofa, in his private sitting room, draping a soft blanket over her trembling form. His fingers brushed a stray lock of hair from her cheek, lingering for just a second longer than necessary. Their eyes met, and in that fleeting connection, Layla saw the truth she had been too afraid to name. Malik was no longer just a stranger, no longer just a husband in name only. He was the man who had been silently watching over her, protecting her even when he pushed her away. And now he was the man whose heart was cracking open before her eyes. Malik turned away abruptly, running a hand through his hair, his voice low. "I will handle this, Layla. You must trust me." She sat up slightly, her voice shaking. "What are you going to do?" Malik exhaled slowly, his shoulders tense. "I am going to end this," he murmured, "one way or another." The next morning Layla woke to a strange quiet. The palace was unusually still, the usual bustle of servants and advisors muted. She rose quickly, her heart pounding, pulling a soft robe around her as she stepped into the corridor. She found Aisha waiting just outside, the older woman's face lined with worry. "The Sheikh has gone to meet them," she whispered. "Your family and the others." Layla's stomach dropped, her knees weakening. "Where?" she breathed. "Where have they gone?" Aisha hesitated. "The old meeting hall at the edge of the compound." Layla barely waited to hear the rest. She gathered her skirts, her feet flying over the polished floors. She did not know what she was going to do, only that she had to reach him, had to be there, had to stand beside him, no matter what. Malik stood in the center of the old stone hall, his dark figure radiating a cold authority, his eyes sharp as blades as he faced the gathered group before him. Layla's mother stood among them, her face tight with a carefully crafted mix of worry and innocence. Beside her stood two men, polished and sleek, their smiles sharp, their eyes cold. Malik's voice rang out, low and lethal. "You thought you could use her," he said softly. "You thought you could slip a dagger into my back while smiling to my face." Layla's mother opened her mouth to protest, but Malik raised a hand, silencing the room. "Enough," he said, his voice like a whip crack. "I have tolerated your games long enough." His gaze flicked briefly to Layla, who had just slipped into the room, her breath catching painfully at the sight of him. He gave the faintest shake of his head, a silent plea for her to stay back, but she could not. Her feet moved before she could think, carrying her forward until she stood beside him, her small figure trembling but unyielding. Layla's mother's eyes widened in shock. "Layla, what are you doing?" she hissed. "Come here, now." But Layla shook her head slowly, tears brimming in her eyes. "No, mother," she whispered. "Not this time." Malik reached out, his hand brushing hers, grounding her, his voice steady as he turned back to the others. "You will leave this place," he said. "You will take your schemes and your lies, and you will disappear. If you do not, I will bury you so deep no one will remember you ever existed." His words were calm, but the force behind them made the air vibrate. The men exchanged uneasy glances, realizing too late that they had underestimated him. Layla's mother's face crumpled. "Layla, please, you do not understand." But Layla held her ground, her voice breaking. "I understand perfectly, Mother. You sold me, you used me, and you never once thought about what it would cost me." Malik's hand tightened around hers, his silent support giving her the strength to stand tall. The confrontation ended without bloodshed, but the damage was done. Layla's family was finished, their schemes unraveled, their reputations ruined. Malik watched them leave with cold eyes, his arm slipping around Layla's shoulders as she sagged against him, the fight draining from her. "You were very brave," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. She turned into his chest, her fingers clutching at his shirt. "I was so afraid," she whispered, "so afraid you would hate me." Malik's jaw tightened, his eyes dark and intense. "I should hate you," he said softly. "I should send you away and never look back, but I cannot. Not when you are the only thing in this cursed life that makes me feel alive." Layla's breath caught, her heart leaping painfully in her chest. She looked up at him, her eyes wide and wet. "Then do not let me go," she whispered. "Do not let them win." Malik swept her into his arms, carrying her back through the palace, his steps sure and strong. He laid her gently on the bed, his hands cradling her face as he kissed her with a fierce tenderness that stole her breath. Layla clung to him, her heart soaring and shattering all at once. She had come here as a sacrifice, a pawn, a girl sold by her family to save themselves. But here, in Malik's arms, she was more. She was seen. She was wanted. She was loved. As dawn broke over the desert, Malik held her close, his voice a low promise in the hush of the room. "I will protect you, Layla, from them, from the world, from myself. You are mine, now and always." And for the first time since she had stepped onto that plane, Layla believed it. She closed her eyes, her fingers curling against his skin, and let herself fall, knowing he would catch her, knowing that together they could survive anything. The next few days unfolded in a haze of tension and quiet rebuilding. Layla stayed close to Malik, feeling the shift between them with every glance, every brush of his hand against hers, every quiet moment they shared away from the prying eyes of the palace. Yet beneath the tender moments, a storm brewed. Malik spent long hours in closed meetings, preparing defenses, rebuilding alliances, tightening his circle. Layla watched from the sidelines, her heart heavy, wondering if the danger had truly passed, or if they were only standing at the edge of a larger war. She wanted to believe they had weathered the worst, but something in Malik's guarded expression told her the fight was not yet over. One evening, Layla sat curled in a corner of the library, a book open on her lap but her mind drifting elsewhere. She thought of her father's sad eyes, her mother's trembling hands, the crushing weight of the betrayal that had nearly destroyed them all. She had been so naive, believing that love and loyalty could survive in a world of power and ambition. She'd been wrong, but Malik had shown her another truth, a fiercer, deeper kind of love, the kind built not on innocence, but on survival, on choice, on the stubborn decision to stay even when everything around you demanded you leave. She closed her eyes, pressing a hand to her chest, feeling the ache of wanting, the bittersweet pull of finally finding something real. Malik stood at the window of his study, watching the desert night stretch endlessly before him, his reflection ghostly in the glass. He could feel the weight of Layla's presence in the palace, could feel the way she had carved a space into his world, a space he had never intended to make for anyone. He told himself he had done the right thing, protecting her, shielding her, pushing her away until he knew she was not part of the plot. Yet the memory of her tears, the way she had looked at him with trust and fear and longing, haunted him. He had thought he was beyond being touched, beyond being moved, but she had slipped past every defense, and now he stood on the edge of a choice that terrified him more than any political threat ever had. The twist came suddenly, a sharp fracture in the fragile peace they had built. Layla was in the gardens when Malik found her, his face pale, his eyes shadowed. "Layla," he said quietly, "we need to talk." Her heart lurched painfully as she followed him inside, sitting across from him as he poured out the truth. The betrayal had gone deeper than they thought. Not only had her family tried to sell him out, but one of his closest advisors had been working with them, feeding them information, planning to orchestrate a scandal that would force Malik to step down. The weight of it crushed the air from the room. Layla's hands shook as she reached for him, her voice breaking. "What does this mean?" Malik took her hands in his grip firm and warm. "It means," he said softly, "that I need to step away, to draw the attention off you, off us." Her breath hitched, her vision blurring. "You are leaving," she whispered. Malik's jaw tightened, his eyes dark and fierce. "No, Layla, I am not leaving you, but I need to play the part. I need them to believe I have pushed you aside, that you were only a passing distraction. Only then will they reveal their full hand." The plan cut deeper than she had expected. For days Malik kept his distance, refusing her at meals, ignoring her in the halls, turning cold eyes on her whenever they crossed paths. Layla understood. She knew it was an act, yet it sliced her heart open every time. She cried herself to sleep at night, clutching the pillow where his scent still lingered, telling herself to be strong, to wait, to trust. But her heart was breaking, and she wondered how long she could endure this silence, this cruel charade. She told herself it was just politics, just survival, but her soul ached with longing, with fear, with the desperate need to hear him whisper her name again, to feel his arms around her again. And then one night the mask shattered. Malik stormed into her room, his eyes wild, his chest heaving, his hands shaking as he reached for her. "I cannot do this," he rasped. "I cannot pretend. I cannot push you away." Layla stumbled into his arms, her fingers clutching at his shoulders, tears streaming down her face. "Malik," she sobbed, "I thought you hated me. I thought you were gone." He pressed frantic kisses to her hair, her face, her mouth, his voice breaking. "I am here. I am here. I will always be here." The weight of their longing, their pain, their love crashed over them, fierce and unstoppable. Malik lifted her into his arms, carrying her to the bed, his mouth capturing hers, in a kiss that left her breathless, his hands trembling as they traced the delicate curve of her spine. Layla's heart soared and shattered all at once, the years of loneliness, of fear, of aching to be seen and loved, all burning away under the heat of his touch. As dawn broke over the desert, they lay tangled together, Malik's arms wrapped tightly around her, his face buried in the hollow of her neck. Layla traced lazy patterns across his chest, her heart full, her mind quiet, for the first time in weeks. "You are mine," Malik whispered against her skin, his voice hoarse and raw. "You have always been mine." Layla pressed a kiss to his forehead, her fingers threading through his dark hair. "And you are mine," she whispered back. "No matter what comes next, we face it together." Malik smiled faintly, his eyes shining with a softness he had never shown anyone else. "Together," he murmured. "Always." Weeks later, the storm had passed. The palace no longer buzzed with tension. The traitors had been exposed. Malik's political enemies scattered. Layla's family had been dealt with quietly, their ambitions crushed, their debts erased, not by Malik's hand, but by Layla's final act of defiance. She had stood before her mother and said, "I am not yours to trade anymore. I choose my own life now." Her mother's shocked face still haunted her sometimes, but it no longer held power. Layla had chosen love, not out of obligation, but out of fierce, burning desire. The hospital wing Layla had helped Malik fund was opening that day, a bright, sunlit building on the edge of the palace grounds, a place meant to heal, to offer second chances. Malik stood beside her as the crowd gathered, his fingers lacing with hers, his dark eyes soft when they met her gaze. "You made this happen," he murmured, his voice warm with pride. Layla shook her head smiling. "We did this," she whispered, and when they cut the ribbon, when the crowd erupted in cheers, when Malik pulled her close and kissed her under the desert sun, Layla felt the last pieces of her old life fall away. She was not a pawn, not a sacrifice, not a girl sold into marriage. She was a woman who had found her voice, her strength, her place. That night, as they stood on the palace balcony, the stars spread wide above them. Malik wrapped his arms around Layla from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder, his voice low against her ear. "Do you remember the first night you arrived?" he murmured. "I was a fool." Layla turned in his arms, her fingers brushing his cheek. "No," she whispered, "you were a man afraid to trust, and I was a girl afraid to love. Now look at us," Malik smiled, a rare, unguarded smile that lit his entire face. "I love you, Layla," he said simply, fiercely. She felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of joy, of healing, of belonging. "I love you too," she breathed, and when he kissed her, slow and sure under the starlit sky, she knew, without doubt, that they had both found something worth fighting for. Love is not something you inherit, not something you can buy, not something you can force. It is something you build, choice by choice, moment by moment, until it becomes the strongest, most unshakable part of who you are. Layla and Malik's love had been born from betrayal, from fear, from impossible odds, yet it had survived, it had grown, and in the end it had set them both free.